You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, a Ryan Donato trade discussion, as well as my reaction to Scott Wheeler's top 100 NHL drafted prospects list before I close things out with a chat on the Hawks prospects currently playing for top 25 teams in college hockey. Quick reminder to go and smash the like button. Jump in the comment section down below as well. Let me know who you think is going to win the opening match of the Four Nations tournament between Canada and Sweden. That's going to kick off here in just a couple of hours. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube as well if you haven't done so already. 100% free, will not cost you anything, and really does help me out in a massive way as I'm now on the climb to 3,000 subscribers. But good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Opening up the show here today is a discussion surrounding undoubtedly the most attractive trade chip left on the Blackhawks roster since they've already moved Taylor Hall to the Carolina Hurricanes. The man I'm talking about, of course, is none other than Ryan Donato. So let's get into the case for the Blackhawks, whether they should or should not trade Ryan Donato. Setting the stage here a little bit, of course, Donato has been one of the best Blackhawks players all season long, already set career highs in both goals and points. In his second year with the Hawks, currently 28 years old, going to turn 29 later this year in April, on an expiring contract as well at $2 million, which, along with the career high in goals, 19 that he already has in 53 games, along with the 18 assists, giving him 37 points. Again, a new career best as well. Having a $2 million AAV on an expiring contract, I think, is another huge reason, in addition to the phenomenal and consistent play, and also the way that Ryan Donato goes about his business. No nonsense, gets pucks on net, plays hard, plays chippy. He's a versatile player who is predominantly a wing, but can also play the center ice position if you need him to. On a real nice stretch before this Four Nations break, had points in 4 consecutive games leading up to the break, 8 points during that stretch. Yes, lots of reasons why Ryan Donato is not only the most attractive trade chip left on the Blackhawks roster, but one of the most attractive trade chips in general heading into this year's deadline. Let's start off, though, Blackhawks fans, with the case for trading Ryan Donato, which I know for a lot of you Blackhawks fans out there is not what you would prefer to see Kyle Davidson do with him here this deadline. But just to kind of make two sides of the argument here on the show, the case for trading Ryan Donato, before I get into what I think is going to happen with him and what I believe the Blackhawks should do, the case for trading him is that he is going to turn 29 years old this summer and undoubtedly is going to command a raise on the free agent market. He's probably going to hit 25, maybe even push 30 goals this year. And also, he's only previously hit 15 goals once and 30 points just twice in his prior 7 NHL seasons. So this does feel like an outlier type of season offensively out of Ryan Donato, even though he has been, I talked about this before the Blackhawks signed him, a capable bottom 6 player, a guy who reminded me of like a Drake Caggiula, but with more skill, a Jake DeBrusk, but with not as much skill, like a little bit of a tweener, but a guy who can go up and down the lineup. But if he does play in the bottom six, still can provide you with some pretty good offense. We've obviously seen that here in Chicago as Donato has had a ton of different roles on the top line with Bedard like he is right now, sometimes down on the fourth line with Lucas Reichel, right? Like he's a jack of all trades type of guy, but it does feel like offensively the odds of him hitting 20 goals once again as he's knocking on the door of being 30 years old, again, feels like a reason to trade Ryan Donato, especially with what the price tag could be for him in return. It seems like, well, a third-round pick at the beginning of the season or at the start of the year was the most likely return for Donato. He might have even worked himself into a second-round pick conversation. Honestly, that's what I think the most likely return would be for Donato if he was going to get traded. And there are some who even think he could push into getting a first-round pick type of return because going to a contender, it would be a later pick in the first round, of course. So there is a good case to trade for Ryan, to make a trade for the Blackhawks to get Ryan Donato out and take on another asset. Again, for the reasons that I just outlined, with this being the type of year that it's going to be hard for him to repeat. I don't think he's going to command a first-round pick, even if he does continue this hot stretch when the Blackhawks return from the Four Nations break. I do think a second-round pick is seeming likely. And another thing to consider, too, for everyone out there saying, well, why would we not re-sign Ryan Donato? He's exactly the right type of guy that you would want kind of leading the young guys. As I mentioned a moment ago, goes about his business the right way, performing well on the ice. The Blackhawks don't have a lot of guys on their roster right now who plays like him. Well, there's no guarantee that Ryan Donato wants to re-sign here with the Blackhawks. He's a guy who hasn't done a whole lot of winning or playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs these last couple of seasons. So who knows even if he'd want to come back here and re-sign with Chicago. And even if he would, again, it would have to be likely at a raise. And Kyle Davidson has gone that route already as a general manager, giving a guy like Jason Dickinson a hefty raise, giving Peter Mrazek a hefty raise in net for his performance, right? And he's now brought in Chris O'Hearn alongside him to kind of make sure he goes about things a little bit smarter financially. I don't know necessarily if Chris O'Hearn is going to advocate for giving a guy like Ryan Donato, again, for all the reasons I just outlined, an extension at a higher AAV. So those are kind of the reasons for the Blackhawks to trade Ryan Donato, but there are plenty of reasons for the Hawks to keep him as well. First and most importantly, he's playing excellent hockey right now, one of the most productive players on the Hawks all season long. And as I've mentioned throughout my deep dives, like probably the most underrated and underappreciated member of this team because of his versatility, because of how he plays a hard-nosed game, and also because of the production that the Blackhawks have desperately needed this year. And also, he's playing alongside Connor Bedard right now, and that's been a little bit of a revolving door. He and Tyler Bertuzzi found some success, but they kind of cooled off, and Andrew Sorensen has split them up over the last couple of weeks. Connor Bedard has worked really nicely alongside Ryan Donato, and they don't have a ton of sample size together this year, but the underlying numbers all look really good. Scott Powers of The Athletic actually came out with an article talking about some of those numbers, and some of the best 5-on-5 analytics, again, albeit in a small sample size, have been when Connor Bedard and Ryan Donato play with one another. And you need Connor Bedard to have someone capable alongside him, and he's working really well with Ryan Donato right now. So trading Donato obviously would jeopardize that and risk Bedard not having a consistent line mate alongside him the rest of the season. Like I mentioned earlier, he also is a respected veteran, a guy who plays the game the right way. I think is a good veteran leader for maybe a guy like Landon Slaggert, a guy like Colton Dach, even though Dach's a more physical type of player. I think Ryan Donato is a good guy to have around these next few years to show them the ropes. So again, plenty of cases for and against trading Ryan Donato. Ultimately, though, Blackhawks fans, if you were asking me right here, right now, what do I think is going to happen? Do I think the Blackhawks trade Ryan Donato, or do I think he's going to stay? I think it's down to three options. The one that I think is the most likely, though, Blackhawks fans, is ultimately I do think Ryan Donato is going to get traded for a second-round pick. If it's not a second-round pick, I don't think he's going to get traded because, quite honestly, even though GMKD has done an excellent job of making third-round selections since taking over, that's not a pick that necessarily the Blackhawks need, and there is a clear reason to keep Ryan Donato around, even if you do risk losing him in the free agent market for nothing, because at the end of the day, the Blackhawks, it is nice to be getting more assets. You always want as many as possible, but they don't absolutely need this one. And I just ultimately, though, feel like a second-round pick, that's too good of an asset for Kyle Davidson to pass up. A third-round pick, that's not one they necessarily need. And we've seen Kyle Davidson packaging picks together to kind of move up and get his guys in drafts. We're at the quality, not quantity point of the Blackhawks rebuild, and we've seen that mindset on display from Kyle Davidson. So getting a second-round pick, I know you could make the argument the Hawks don't need that second-round pick either, but stockpiling those can allow Kyle Davidson to make trades on draft day to move up and get his guys. So ultimately, I do think Ryan Donato winds up getting traded for a second-round pick for the reasons I just mentioned, an outlier type of season, knocking on the door of being 30 years old. He's going to command a raise in the offseason. Also, who knows if he'd even be willing to sign on with the Blackhawks for an extension. The second most likely option, I think, is Ryan Donato doesn't get traded and he signs a 2-year extension with the Blackhawks. I don't think he's going to get one of the 3-year deals that we saw, like Davidson give out to Peter Mrazek. It's going to have to be a short-term, not as big of an AAV as Donato could probably command on the open market, and that's probably a problem because with Chris O'Hearn alongside, even though the Blackhawks have all this financial freedom coming up, they still got to stick to the nitty-gritty details and go about things the absolute right way and got to take advantage of all of their cap space to the best of their abilities with everything they're going to have to take on in the future. But I do think Ryan Donato getting re-signed is in the cards, Blackhawks fans. And according to Scott Powers, he's heard like the Hawks aren't in a rush to trade him and they don't feel like they absolutely need to trade him. So we'll see what winds up happening. The third option for the Blackhawks, I do think it's the most unlikely of the three, but is a possibility, is Donato doesn't get traded and the Blackhawks just let him walk at the end of the year. Yeah, it would be a shame to not get an asset in return to get literally nothing out of Ryan Donato, but at least you get to keep him alongside Connor Bedard the rest of the way. Hopefully they're playing productive hockey alongside one another and you don't jeopardize another veteran coming out of the lineup. So we'll see what winds up happening. I do believe Ryan Donato ultimately gets traded, though, for a second-round pick. There will be more news coming on the Ryan Donato front, and I promise I'll keep you all up to date right here on Locked On Blackhawks. But there are my thoughts on a Ryan Donato trade discussion and the likelihood of him being dealt by the Blackhawks. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll dive into which Hawks prospects cracked Scott Wheeler's top 100. But first, I got to talk to you all about a new sponsor here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, which is Factor. Are you looking for a way to optimize your nutrition this year? Well, Factor makes eating well super easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. And with 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week, you can easily customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, protein plus, or keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled up all day long. And I personally love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. I'm a guy who doesn't have a lot of free time on my hands doing a Blackhawks show, covering Blackhawks games, my regular job. I got golf stuff going on. I personally love the convenience of Factor. They take the stress out of my meal planning every single week, and it's simply unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. So go and eat smart with Factor now by getting started at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off and use the code LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful, Blackhawks fans, but bear with me. Code LockedOnNHL50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box with Factor. Segment 2, Scott Wheeler, whose NHL prospect pool rankings I just broke down yesterday. Make sure to go and check out that show if you haven't done so already. Blackhawks, spoiler alert, came in the top 10, but you're going to want to go and see where they wound up. But Scott Wheeler also today, yesterday actually, as of the time of this recording, dropped his top 100 NHL drafted prospects list. And how about this? 7 Hawks prospects found themselves in the top 100, tied with the Washington Capitals for the most of any team, while the San Jose Sharks, Minnesota Wild, and the Nashville Predators also had 6. All of those teams found themselves in the top 10 of Scott Wheeler's prospect pool rankings as well. Florida, by the way, the Panthers are the only team without a single prospect inside Scott Wheeler's top 100, but hey, that's the price of winning. Us Blackhawks fans are all too familiar with a depleted prospect pool. That was the case from basically like 2014 to 2019. The Blackhawks didn't develop anyone, hence us being kind of in a real dark spot these last couple of years. But before I dive into Scott Wheeler's top 100 NHL drafted prospects list and talk about the 7 Hawks prospects that found themselves on this list, do want to be sure to mention, just like in the prospect pool rankings yesterday, if you are now a fully established member of your NHL club, you're no longer a part of this list. So no Connor Bedard, no Macklin Celebrini like yesterday, no Dylan Guenther, no Logan Cooley, no Matvei Michkov, Brant Clark, Cutter Gauthier, Logan Stankoven, Zach Benson, Lane Hudson, Shane Wright, Kent Johnson, Owen Zellweger. Like, there was a long list of them, and I know that kind of takes some of the fun out of it, but that's what makes it truly a prospects list. But before I get into the 7 Blackhawks prospects that found themselves in the top 100, did want to rattle off Wheeler's top 10 here real quick. Coming in at number 1, Blackhawks fans, is none other than Ivan Demidov. And not only is that a tough pill to swallow, Demidov is in a tier all by himself. He is the only player in Wheeler's top 100 to be in tier 1. Would be real nice to have that alongside Connor Bedard. But nonetheless, Zeev Buium kicking off tier 2 comes in at number 2. At number 3, though, Blackhawks fans, is Artem Levshunov, who, yes, I would have rather had Ivan Demidov over him, but Levshunov has still done a lot of good things in his first pro season. It's just people's minds are getting flooded with the craziness of what Demidov is doing over in the KHL, which I do understand the frustration, but to go as far as calling Levshunov a bust, like, I think that stuff is way too far. He just scored a really nice goal last night, his 4th tally of the season. I think now has 20 points in like 42 AHL games. Nothing to bat an eye at for a 19-year-old playing against grown men for the first time. So Levshunov comes in at number 3. Interesting, though, behind Zeev Buium. Hard for me to argue that as a guy who absolutely loved Zeev Buium. I mentioned Levshunov deserved to be the first defenseman off the board, but I would not be surprised to see if Zeev Buium wound up being the best one when it's all said and done. Levshunov, as a big right-handed defenseman, though, with his two-way game, understood why he was the first defenseman off the board. He has the higher upside. Number 4 is Zane Parekh for the Calgary Flames. At number 5 is Will Smith of the San Jose Sharks. At 6 is Sam Dickinson, also of the San Jose Sharks. Honestly, I've never been the biggest Zane Parekh guy. I'd have Will Smith ahead of Zane Parekh. At number 7 is Berkeley Catton, who I'd have over Sam Dickinson. At number 8 is Ryan Leonard, who's been excellent, great pick for the Washington Capitals. As I mentioned yesterday, I like Ryan Leonard a lot. A huge reason why I think the Capitals prospect pool was a little underrated by Scott Wheeler. At number 9 is Gabe Perreault, who I legitimately cannot believe went in the 20s to the New York Rangers. Like, legitimately cannot believe Gabe Perreault went in the 20s. Might even be crazier than Oliver Moore falling all the way to number 19. And I knew it was going to be either Perreault or Moore. Colby Barlow, I thought, could have been in the mix potentially. But when those two guys were falling, I knew we were probably going to get one of them. Perreault to go in the 20s is so crazy. I do have him behind Ryan Leonard, though, like Scott Wheeler. And then rounding things out at number 10 for Wheeler is Beckett Seneca for the Anaheim Ducks. Still can't believe he went number 3 to the Anaheim Ducks because, you know, if they take Caden Lindstrom, we wind up with Artem Levshunov and Ivan Demidov from the 2024 NHL draft, which is very frustrating. Levshunov, the only Blackhawks prospect to come in Wheeler's top 10. Next Blackhawks prospect in the top 100 is my boy, Frank the Tank Nazar, who checked in at number 27. Wheeler had him listed as a Tier 4 NHL prospect. At number 28 is Kevin Korchinski, the long, lengthy, left-handed defenseman, former 7th overall pick in the 2023 NHL draft. Still is the second youngest defenseman to play in an NHL game this season, only 20 years old, still so much runway for Kevin Korchinski, and it feels like he's really gotten comfortable down in Rockford. When we did see him on the NHL scene, his gap control looked a lot more comfortable. He used his skating ability to kind of fend off defensive or offensive rushes coming his way, and just looked much more confident in himself in the defensive zone, while his outlet passes, his puck carrying, looked really sharp as always. At number 54 next was Sam Renzel. I personally, for those of you who've been tuning into my Hawks under 23 rankings, I did have Sam Renzel barely edging out Kevin Korchinski. I would have had Renzel as a Tier 4 prospect as well. But Renzel has really kind of brushed to the side the raw prospect term by his name this year with Minnesota as a sophomore, has kind of pieced it all together instead of being just a, you know, like a prototype. We saw the 6'4" right-handed defenseman, a guy who can skate. He's actually really pieced it together and turned himself into one of the best defensemen in all of college hockey. And I'll be talking more about Sam Rinzel here in just a moment. Next Blackhawks prospect on the list after Rinzel at 54 in Tier 5 was Oliver Moore in Tier 6. Then it was Sasha Boisvert at 79. To me personally, even though Oliver Moore has the better foot speed, I think is shaped up to be more of a true center iceman. Like, as a freshman last year for Minnesota, I thought he handled himself better defensively and at the faceoff dot, most importantly, than Sasha Boisvert has as a freshman. But Boisvert, good motor as well, good two-way game, very good compete level, is a gym junkie, does like boxing. Both guys are super athletic. More, with the foot speed, like, I think people believe that gives him more runway, but I actually think Sasha Boisvert has the higher runway. Oliver Moore, I just don't think is ever going to have the finishing ability. He's never going to be a goal scorer at the next level. His foot speed and the way he reads plays and his compete and how he dogs pucks, that's, I think, how he's going to be generating points at the next level. Sasha Boisvert, even though I don't think he has the highest playmaking either, I think he's going to be a really good goal scorer. I would have had Sasha Boisvert in Tier 5. Personally, his freshman year, I think, has been better than Oliver Moore's, but I understand where Scott Wheeler is coming from. Rounding things out in the top 100, the last Blackhawks prospect also coming in Tier 6 with Oliver Moore and Sasha Boisvert. Finally, somebody's putting respect on the boy. Nick Lardis checks in at number 94, the leading goal scorer in the entire CHL, who's already at 52 goals through 50 games this season. Going to be super fun to see if he tracks down Alex DeBrincat's 65-goal campaign that he had back in 2016-17 when he was a member of the Erie Otters. Love to see Nick Lardis find himself in the top 100 here. And like my Blackhawks prospect rankings that I went through, I had Nick Lardis ahead of Marek Vanacker, even though he was a first-round pick for the Blackhawks in last year's draft. I think Nick Lardis is the more attractive prospect. They're very on the similar level. I think they're both behind Boisvert, Moore, and Rinzel, and Nazar and Korchinski and Levshinov, who I mentioned earlier. But I love to see Nick Lardis find his way on here, who's looking more and more like a late first-round pick or an early second-round pick than an early third by the day. Gonna be fun to watch Lardis to see what he winds up with when it's all said and done for the Brantford Bulldogs. He's already the single-season leading goal scorer in Brantford history. But there are my thoughts on Scott Wheeler's top 100 NHL prospects list. The only ones I would say who kind of got snubbed, Marek Vanacker and maybe Drew Comesso, in my opinion, but thought it was a pretty fair list from Scott Wheeler. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, before I close out today's show, still got to get into an update on the Hawks prospects like Oliver Moore, Sasha Boisvert, and Sam Rinzel, who are currently playing for top 25 teams in college hockey. But first, got to talk to you all about another new sponsor here on Locked On Blackhawks, which is Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you than unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Because whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Get snackin and get crackin with the snack that packs a protein punch by visiting wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Again, that's wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more today. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, got to make sure to check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast so that you can become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. And you can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey right now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, getting into my weekly prospects update here on the show. Today, I wanted to focus on which Hawks prospects are currently playing for top 25 teams in college hockey, as we're starting to creep towards the month of March in the Frozen Four. March is always my favorite month of the season. We're getting down the home stretch of the season in college hockey. So let's talk about the most recent top 25 rankings and how the Hawks prospects playing for those teams are faring so far this year. Coming in at number 3, kicking things off, is the Minnesota Golden Gophers, two prospects I just talked about a moment ago in the midst of their sophomore seasons. Oliver Moore and Sam Renzel, both first-round picks for the Blackhawks. Moore has tallied 23.7 goals and 16 assists in 28 games, again, as a sophomore, currently good for 5th on the team in points. It is a very talented roster that the Golden Gophers are working with, and you know they're going to be making a good run for the national title. But Moore, like he did last year as a freshman, has kind of picked up the pace as the season went on. Maybe he's a little bit of a slow starter or whatever it may be, but since returning from helping the United States win yet another gold at the World Juniors, hopefully they'll take down another international tournament here in the next couple of weeks. But since returning, Oliver Moore has been playing different level hockey, very similar to what happened last year. Scored a couple of goals in his most recent games, and that's the area I really want to see him working on. The playmaking is always going to be his baby in terms of offensive production. Want to see the hands kind of keep up with the feet and start getting some of the finished products, even if it's on like breakaways. Like Oliver Moore has the speed to be one of those, like a Michael Grabner type of guy. Like the kid can absolutely fly. He's got great acceleration, great crossovers, hop steps, edge work. And I think he's going to utilize that at his best in the NHL in a two-way game, but I still would like to see him give a little bit more in the goal-scoring department. But nice to see Oliver Moore playing well here as of late. Sam Renzel's been excellent just all season long. As I mentioned in segment 2, one of the best defensemen in all of college hockey as a sophomore, and you gotta think the Blackhawks are wanting him to make that leap to professional hockey and ink that entry-level contract when this year comes to a close, whenever that may be for the Golden Gophers. Renzel's production has kind of quieted down compared to the early portion of the season. I think he had 8 goals in the opening 18 or 19 games. Still has 25 points in 30 games on the year, 9 goals and 16 assists, but I think he's only got 3 or 4 points since the calendar turned over to 2025. But regardless of the point production, he's playing a huge role for one of the top teams in college hockey. Definitely got to be keeping up with the Golden Gophers down the stretch. A true national title aspiration this season. Speaking of national title aspirations, that's the narrative whenever David Carl and the Denver Pioneers are on the ice, and Blackhawks prospect Aiden Thompson has been a big part of their success this year. Denver's at number 6. Thompson, one of the leading scorers in all of college hockey, with 35 points, 16 goals, and 19 assists through 28 games. A new career high for him with the Pioneers. 8th in college hockey in points, 11th in goals, 2nd on the team in points, which is noteworthy considering the amount of talent that Denver has at the top of their roster, trying to win back-to-back national championships in what's likely going to be David Carl's final season behind their bench. Next, at number 7, is the Providence Friars. And how about John Mustard? I don't think he's quite getting the recognition like Sasha Boisvert is for his freshman season with North Dakota. And quite honestly, even from your boy, I've been kind of gassing up Jack Pridham the most out of the Blackhawks third-round picks from this past year. But John Mustard has been excellent for the Providence Friars. 17 goals, 17 goals. That would be unbelievable. 17 points, 6 goals, 11 assists in 28 games as a freshman. 3rd on the team in points, 2nd in assists. And again, this is a top 10 team in college hockey who, yes, do have a lot of veterans. Mustard is usually playing on the 2nd or 3rd line, but I think it's really noteworthy for him to be in the top 3 in points and assists in his first year of college hockey as an 18-year-old. Then also got to mention Tage Harding on the back end as a senior, man who turned 23 years old back in January, so is creeping out the door in college. He has 12 points, 1 goal, and 11 assists through 28 games with the Friars. Going to be interesting to see if the Blackhawks give him an entry-level contract. I honestly just don't really see the room, but 6'7", was a 3rd-round pick back in 2021. 2020, yeah, it was not a Kyle Davidson draft, so it's not like he feels tied to Tage Harding or anything. The most likely outcome is Harding doesn't get an entry-level contract, but we'll see what winds up happening Connor Kelly on the blue line, along with Tage Harding for Providence, didn't get an ELC from the Blackhawks after his senior season. Then we go to number 9, Boston University. Ryan Green, the co-captain of the Terriers, he's picked up his play as of late, and that's perfectly coincided with the Terriers playing their best hockey. They just took down Boston College a couple of days ago to win the Bean Pot. I was retweeting some clips that I saw coming out of BU's social media team. Ryan Green lifting the Bean Pot, skating and holding it as the co-captain. And he's been playing like the co-captain recently, really since the calendar flipped over to 2025 as well. 26 points, 12 goals, and 24 assists now in 26 games as a junior for Green. He's third on the team in points behind both Hudsons. Wish Ryan Green was the one who was the driving force for that team and leading them in points this year, but he's gotten better as the year progressed. They have national title aspirations. That's what Ryan Green came back for. And I think they're a more likely bunch to do it than John Mustard, Tage Harding, and Providence is. So Minnesota, Denver, and BU, I think, are the 3 teams with Blackhawks prospects. Not to throw shade on Providence, but I think those are the 3 teams with the best chance of taking down the national championship. Rounding things out, involving Blackhawks prospects in the top 25, Sasha Boisvert with number 17, North Dakota. Sasha's been amazing as a freshman for formerly the Fighting Sioux. 20 points, 9 goals, and 11 assists in 27 games as a freshman. The production has kind of cooled down these last few weeks, particularly the goal scoring. I mean, he was electric out of the gate and scoring some beauties, absolute howitzers of wrist shots was Sasha Boisvert. Still the second leading scorer as a freshman, though, for a top 25 team and a really strong program like North Dakota. Sasha's probably going to go back for at least one more year, probably only one more year if I had to guess, depending on how the season goes. But there are all the Blackhawks prospects currently playing for top 25 NCAA teams. Going to be fun to keep an eye on all of them as we're starting to creep towards, again, the month of March and the Frozen Four. That's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode. Make sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast as well. That way, you can tune in on the go to and from work, on your lunch break, whatever it may be. If you want to listen to some hockey talk, that's where you can find me. Until the next episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Should be a fun opening match between Sweden and Canada. Drop your predictions or drop your thoughts, prediction on who's going to win the tournament in the comment section down below, as well as your prediction on what will happen to Ryan Donato. I'll catch you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.